You're watching Business Access TV.
Business Access.
Business Access. Business Access.
Business Access.
You are watching Business Access TV.
Business Access TV.
Serious about business.
Serious about business.
Business Access TV comes to you from Jamaica Pegasus for the CanEx Jamaica Seminar Series, where we'll be giving you some insight on high-level content related to the regulatory, legal, investment, and medicinal industry landscape. I'm Andrew Laidley. Stay with us.
Welcome to CanEx 2017. Very, very exciting to be here. My name is Jack Brockway. I am your MC for today. Very honored to be your MC today. What we have in front of us today and over the next few months and years is an incredible opportunity to really push this country forwards. And it's, I think you'll all agree, it is fantastic. We are coming out of Prohibition, which is an amazing opportunity for all of us. And it's a massive global opportunity. Yes, we can help everybody in this country. We can help everybody around the world. This is a new, sorry, I'll correct myself. This is not new. This is very old. This is something that actually has been on our doorstep for a very long time. But you know, we are opening up our eyes, and it's something that we should be proud of, that we are part of this wave going forward. Deloitte's forecast, the cannabis industry will be bigger than the alcohol industry worldwide. Bigger than the fashion industry worldwide, and even bigger than the auto industry. That is what we're dealing with. It's huge. Now, cannabis industry can potentially add an additional 1.4 billion US dollars to the Jamaican GDP by the end of 2019. That's also pretty impressive. But we're not just talking about financial benefits here. If we're looking at the United States, the states that have legalized cannabis already, they have seen an average 25% reduction in deaths related to painkillers alone. Yeah. In Washington State, they've seen a 10% reduction in violent crime after legalization. You know, there are so many benefits to this. It is amazing.
You know, the question I get asked a lot is, why did we do this? This is not our... A year ago today, I was essentially a spectator in the cannabis industry, just reading it along with business reports and articles to speak to. You know, here's an industry that's going along, and it interests me. But I had no particular interest in it until one day I started realizing that the conversation in Jamaica seemed to be, you know, very, how should I put it, difficult, challenging. There didn't seem to be anything progressive in what I was reading. It just seemed to be fraught with contention and people being worried and scared about losing certain things. And I wasn't hearing a conversation that was saying, what can Jamaica get out of the industry? I just heard about people talking about them potentially losing their stake in any potential industry. And it dawned on me that, you know, in the Caribbean, too often we've lost certain of our natural gifts, our natural talents, things that we have developed. I mean, you look at Trinidad, for example, they developed the steel pan. And the guys that play steel pan in Trinidad, incredibly talented, but none of them can actually live off of the instrument that they're so talented playing over the course of a year. Japan trademarked the steel pan. Japan has developed an electronic steel pan that, like an electronic keyboard, can teach people to play and leverage this incredible instrument that we created here in the Caribbean for a global product. And, you know, that struck me. And I look at the cannabis industry, I look at ganja, I mean, there's all these different terms for it. But fundamentally, what was at stake is to look back in time and see all these markets where it's taking off and Jamaica to get left in the dust. Again, the Caribbean has a great potential, great opportunity that was not realized. And I said, well, maybe we can do something. Maybe we can get involved and we can add some value. And the way we could do that, and we sought to do that, is by having an event, creating a platform for conversation that would bring into the mix people who weren't necessarily already in the industry, but curious about the industry and what the opportunity could bring. And along that continuum, or in search of trying to understand the industry better, I jumped on a plane and I went to a couple conferences abroad in the States. And what struck me was, the caliber of the people going to these conferences. These are serious business people, dressed appropriately, with the right conversations, looking for the right outcomes. And it dawned on me that if we could bring that level of professionalism and conversation to this topic here in Jamaica, that you really have the opportunity for people to see what the material benefits could be individually and especially collectively for the country. As Jack alluded to, there's huge upsides to it. But when you talk about a country of 2.9 million people, and you compare that favorably with Colorado that has a population of 5 million people, and you understand that in 2015, Colorado generated 150 million US dollars in tax revenues from this industry. But much more significantly, and that's a big number, but much more significantly, the economic benefit to Colorado's state economy was $2.5 billion. And when you look at a country like Jamaica that is starved for growth for so long, and you look at the natural affinity and relationship between ganja and this country, and where that positions it in the global market space, I mean, what can come to this country financially? And I don't mean just at a GDP level. I mean people now being able to dial into specific business opportunities and communities that can benefit. Health can improve, education can improve, all these social challenges that the country faces. You now have a ready-made opportunity to self-finance and pursue. And so that's what drives me to do this.
So my journey begins about 6 years ago. So we hear about all the education that I've had. And I knew nothing about a beautiful system known as the endocannabinoid system. So my journey begins about 6 years ago. I was in the state of Washington working as a family physician, occupational environmental medicine physician, and I was also a medical review officer. For those of you that don't know what a medical review officer is, I was a drug tester. So for those of you that had to go to a drug testing and pee in a cup, if you were positive for this beautiful chemical known as THC, you could lose your job. And that was the world I was living in. And my mother was dying of an illness known as idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Fancy term for we don't know what caused your lung disease. My mom had never smoked. She never worked in an occupation. She exercised. She never ate red meats. She did all the so-called right things. And I could just remember as if it was today. She was watching a TV program, and I could hear her say, "They're using ganja." Ganja? What is she talking about, ganja? And that was my beeline into the bedroom. And I learned that they were using cannabis in Israel for COPD, asthma, lung cancer, and PTS. Every Jew had thought to be having PTS from the Holocaust. Did not compute. My whole life, I told people not to smoke. And why would you smoke weed when you can't breathe? And I had to think, what do we give somebody when they can't breathe? Right? What do? We give them an inhaler, we give them some oxygen, or we put them on steroids, right? What does those do? One's a bronchodilator, and one's for inflammation. And that brought my curiosity, and my journey began. I never got to give this plant to my mother, but because of the work I'm doing, there's a man known as Bill Davis that has the same illness, and I want to share his story with you. He called me up about 2 years ago and he said, "Ma'am, I got the illness that your mother died from, and I got 90 days to live." And I said, "Are you using cannabis?" He said, "No, ma'am." I said, "You need to be." I said, "Get a peak flow meter, start inhaling it." He said, "But I can't breathe." I said, "No, I want you to inhale it. I want to get it in your lungs, into your bloodstream, get it into you." Today, this man is alive. He's walking 3 miles. And halfway through the conversation, he goes to me, "Ma'am, I can't lie to you. I'm a preacher in Anderson, South Carolina." So this is how strong this stigma is, that a preacher can't talk about it. Today, he's written a book called The Outlaw, A Christian's Journey with Marijuana. So I believe we're all doing God's work here, and I'm proud to be here. So we talked about alcohol, right? We talked about cannabis. Where are we with this? Alcohol is illegal. Alcohol is legal. Cannabis illegal. We know the properties. We talk about addiction. I'm using cannabis for treatment of addiction to get people off of their opioids, tobacco, alcohol, and so many other illnesses. We talk about how many people have died from this plant. 0. Nobody has ever died from this plant. We say that there's no science. What part of 0 is it that we don't understand, folks? So what we have right now is an opioid epidemic. The United States of America is 5% of the world's population, consuming 80% of the pain medications. We have 20% of the doctors writing 80% of the prescriptions. We have people dying since 1996, when we started to include pain as another vital sign. And we started to prescribe these opioids, and we created addiction. These people were not born as addicts. So, global debts, global folks, alcohol, over 1 million. Cigarettes, 4.9 million. Pharmaceuticals, what are legal, prescribed, given to our patients. Cannabis, 0. So let's look at this plant for what we can do. We have options. Right now we've got cotton, which takes time to grow. Hemp, which can actually heal the planet. Less water, less pesticides. So there's an opportunity here. So I look at cannabis for 2 primary reasons. It's for consumption, and it's for industrial uses. Basic, whatever you want to call it, but those are the 2 basic things that we consume it for. And I'm looking at this now as a global issue. I've been from Massachusetts, where I've been fighting for that. We're done with that fighting, but still we're not done. So on a global issue, we got to get this plant legalized, folks. Everywhere. It has to be legal. There should be no boundaries. If you're diabetic in one state, it doesn't go away. If you've lost a limb, it doesn't grow back because you change location. Legalize it. We need to cultivate the plant. We need to create products. We need laboratory testing. And the most important thing is education, folks. Education is what we're doing right here. And that's what we're going to do by changing the stigma and be able to talk about it.
We are satisfied in tourism that enough work has been done to enable the market to understand the values of health and wellness. The economic impact is well indicated in various volumes and publications, and have come out of many research findings. Numbers have been ascribed to it, billions of dollars in terms of its global value. And we think that people travel primarily to fulfill their passions. And what are these passions? And we established 5 networks which we think capture these passions. food, gastronomy. People travel to enjoy the cuisines of different cultures and nations. And in the process, they move to see how these foods are prepared. Who are these people who prepare them? And sometimes, what are the products from which they are derived? So they are interested in food trails and in going into the farms and to see the process and to meet with the farmers and to interact with all elements of those who provide and make food available to them. And then shopping. And we think that that's a big item. I think if 88% of those who travel for food, then it is said over 60% of those who travel go for shopping. And that's the next big experience, because they want to authenticate their vacation. They want something which is authentic, that is autochthonous, that really comes out of the bowels of the people from the cultures that they interact. And when they go home, to provide discussion points and references as to the visit that they made. And the third, we think, is for entertainment and for sports and for cultural pursuits and heritage pursuits, and all those things that have to do with tying in to the flora and the fauna of a country and the elements which identify the specificity of a people, and to enable them to see the differences while embracing the similarities. So this is a whole area of what makes for the joy that Professor mentioned, and the feeling of satisfaction of interacting with others. And then we feel that people travel for health and wellness. People travel to restore youth, to engender vigor. And I think Doc has been very, very effusive in terms of her own explanation and expressions of what the particular value of the cannabis does to enable health and wellness. And that's where we want to put the focus, because I have here today with me, and I wanted to make that point, the chairperson of, or rather the coordinator of the networks within my ministry, that health and wellness is a key part of. And I want to express publicly to you now that we will be establishing a special task force to inform me on the wider policy approaches to cannabis-infused tourism as a critical element for the promotion of the sector across the country. It is true that we are not in the area of engaging Schedule 1. It is true that we have made our position clear already, as far afield as the UN itself, on the position of Schedule 1. But we are part of a global arrangement. And therefore, we are constrained in the same way that Professor mentioned, the constraint as a medical practitioner that she has in Boston and in the US in her applications. But we are satisfied that the nutraceutical values, that the spas of our country can benefit greatly from the utilization of oils and wraps and the medical applications that cannabis offers. And so we are going to designate an area, and I'm not preempting the policy, but I'm indicating that within that frame are going to be discussions about where do we do what. Because if we don't, we will have a very disorganized and unstructured arrangement. And tourism is not about chaos and disorder. We're about order and structuring. So we think that the areas from the southwestern coastal strip of Jamaica, that is from Negrill's West End back to Treasure Beach, Jakes, would represent a critical zone for which nutraceuticals could, in fact, be made a key part of that experience, and the cannabis-infused experience could be expressed. This is not to say that there aren't possibilities elsewhere, but I make the point, and I just came back from Bangkok where I made a big statement to the WTTC on the question of over-tourism, when tourism becomes too much of a good thing for communities, if it isn't planned, if it isn't structured, and if it isn't ordered. And if we are going to make well of the expansion and development of what will become a big industry in Jamaica, it has got to be structured, it has got to be ordered, and it has got to be managed.
I'd like to say that the discussion today is clearly very timely. And I noticed that there'll be presentations on recent legal, regulatory, investments, and medical marijuana developments. And the 4 key areas for discussion, 4 dimensions of the issue that we'll look at include medical, health and wellness, business and legal, and processing and cultivation. And I'd like to say that St. Vincent and the Grenadines supports, and by our actions demonstrated, the decriminalization of marijuana for recreational use. And there are in fact 2 companies, one from Canada and one from Europe, who are looking to invest in medical marijuana in our country. Of course, there are broader dimensions to this question of marijuana. And we are hoping to be guided by the experiences of sessions like this, and very importantly, by the results of a regional commission that was set up by CARICOM to more or less study this issue. And I should say that one of the purposes of the regional commission is to carry out national consultations in all CARICOM countries. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines to date is actually the only country in which one of those national consultations have been held. Just wanted you to know the objectives of this commission, so you'd have a sense of how broadly we're looking at this matter. 1, or A, to conduct a rigorous inquiry into the social, economic, health, and legal issues surrounding marijuana use in the Caribbean, and to determine whether there should be a change in the current drug classification, speaking to some of what we heard from Doctor this morning, drug classification of marijuana, thereby making the drug more accessible for all types of usage, religious, recreational, medical, and research. And B, to recommend, if there is to be a reclassification, the legal and administrative conditions that shall apply. So this is taking place right now. Clearly, it may in some instances be interpreted not to be moving at a sufficiently quick speed. So it is for us to decide how we are going to get it to gallop along so that we could benefit from the opportunities that are available in this industry right now. And in addition to sharing the terms of reference, I just wanted to give you some feedback which came out of that national consultation which was actually held in St. Vincent, because I think it's instructive for us to have a sense of what some of the thinking is on the subject. 1, and this is something which has essentially come out to some extent by the presentation, some of the previous presentations. 1, the traditional farmers, and I'm getting this from one of the commissioners, one of the regional commissioners. The traditional farmers were concerned that the cultivation would be taken over from them and handed to the wealthy, who might have more accessible lands conducive to farming. And that particular consideration brings me back to something which I read in this magazine from the interview with Trudeau. Because he was asked in that interview, do you have any idea about what sort of industry may emerge? What seems to be happening in America is maybe a consolidation around a few big companies. And his response was, we're at the very beginning of some thoughtful conversations with the provinces. If you look to alcohol as a model, you have big global players in beer in Canada.
but you also have a lot of microbreweries. And there's that capacity and consumer choice. If you know what you want, there are options out there. Ensuring there's a range of business opportunities for small, local producers and larger producers is not an unreasonable vision for what that industry could look like. So it seems then as if there is some scope for us not to more or less crowd out those small local producers that have been a part of this industry in one way or another, even when it was not legally possible for them to do so. So that was one of the outcomes, or one of the queries or concerns that emerged in the course of the national consultation. The same, well, more than that, the same traditional farmers believe that they should be compensated for their years of advocacy for legalization of marijuana. I'm not sure how our governments would look upon that. A couple of the pharmacists in attendance strongly opposed decriminalization, since it was their opinion that the effect of the drug has contributed to growing numbers of mentally ill patients in St. Vincent. I mean, I'm just letting you know what came out of the consultations. Of course, this is a sentiment that exists in the public domain and that we must respond to, if nothing else. And the final point was that the majority were in favor of decriminalization, at least mainly on the premise of the potential positive impact on the economy. And there is certainly that potential positive impact on the economy, potential positive impact on our lives from a social, from a health, from an economic, and from a general development standpoint. And I am happy that we are at the table in a meaningful discussion of this subject, because it is something that is fundamental to what is happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Marijuana right now, even with its current designation, is making a major contribution to our economic activity, just as it is here in Jamaica. So it is something that we need to regularize, we need to consider, and we need to seek to benefit in the maximum possible way. I hope that what we have here and the messages coming out of this seminar series filter into the way in which our leaders and policymakers are approaching this subject, so that we could have in the shortest possible time outcomes that are in our utmost best interest.
We certainly are in a global moment where we're coming out of prohibition. That's extremely evident. In the last year alone, we have seen countries like Germany, a very conservative nation, put together a full federal medical program. And in the last month, it has been announced that that federal medical program will be sponsored by the National Health Insurance. Right? That's a huge, huge deal. And what that means for so many opportunities for this country is tremendous. But what I'd love to talk about right now, in particular, would be, both Jamaica and I can only assume St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for decades have been behind persecution and prosecution, and cannabis, ganja, has been a bad thing. How have you dealt internally amongst your colleagues? Because you're sitting here because you're progressive individuals. You see the opportunity. You've read the science. You are really understanding that, world leaders like Trudeau and Merkel and many others, are certainly recognizing this. But amongst your colleagues, this must be quite tricky. Because as nations, we have been told the opposite for so long. How are you, what are sort of the key facts that you're using internally to really change the dialogue? And what are some of the big challenges that, as an industry, we should be thinking about purporting and getting out there in terms of education?
I just want to say that there are a couple of things that you use to more or less change the discussion on marijuana that have been used to change discussion. One is the fact that it's very expensive for us to actually prosecute, people who are considered to who we consider to have offended the law on marijuana. I mean, and especially when it is a matter that for which only small quantities are involved. So I think that that has some weight, some persuasive weight. And more than that, people have come around to an understanding of the contribution that it makes to our economy and the potential that is making to our economy. And when we look at regional and world developments as well, they see, well, the world is coming around to using this. We have Colorado, for instance, as a pioneering state in the US on this subject. So these things, coupled with a more of a discerning mind and the greater availability of the scientific evidence, and it coming into the mainstream, I think these things have come together, these factors have come together to cause there to be a greater acceptance among our peers, be it at the cabinet level, be it at the level of parliament or otherwise. And it's leading to a change of what's happening. It's leading us to consider our laws and our regulations to see how we might be able to modify them into this new reality.
Okay, I think that much of what has been said can also be applied in our situation. I think beyond that, there has been a growing appreciation of the wider value of the plant itself, and the fact that it is a very ubiquitous plant with tremendous positive value chain relations, all of which can be utilized to enable a level of economic activity that will redound to the benefit of the entire country. I think also that because Jamaica has had a very strong culture of use of marijuana, and it has had impact in one way or another, the dialogue has to be structured in relation to two areas. One, the medical and nutraceutical, and secondly, the recreational. But I want to infuse a third dimension, because the Rastafarians have used it as part of their rituals and as a very important part of the religious sacrament. And that has to be respected, and I think that that is what we are driven by a lot. So as the discussion continues, we're finding, for example, that the governance structure takes a far more informed position. And that informed position is driven by and large by people. There's a thing about having laws, and then there's a thing about legitimacy of laws. That laws by themselves, as Marlon will perhaps tell you, gives power. But real authority comes from legitimization of it, and legitimization is from compliance. Is when people respond to it and people deal with it. So a lot of times laws exist, and they exist more in terms of the absence of compliance than the presence thereof. The marijuana laws in Jamaica have been a case in point. And I suspect that a lot of consideration was given also to the fact that a number of young people experimenting in their teenage years have become involved in that trap and have lost a lot of their own developmental energy. As a result, they've found that they're criminalized because they had this one act of, quote-unquote, indiscretion, which is proving to be not so much of an indiscretion anymore. And I think that those types of realities came forcefully to drive a new approach to the whole business of the marijuana use in Jamaica. And the laws are being amended, I think, and the process is perhaps not as fast as some people want, but guess what? It is a process, and it is happening.
So I thought it would be good to maybe move into the sporting side of things, because I could never have imagined that I'd be talking about cannabis and sports in the same sentence. But I think we should probably kick off with Jim. If you tell us a little bit about your background and really how you started getting on the cannabis train and what that meant for you.
Well, I've been a proponent of cannabis for 44 years, and I've always enjoyed the plant. It made me feel good, helped me sleep. And then obviously during my career, we get drug tested and stuff like that. But in the NFL back then, you knew when the test was going to be. So I'd always stop smoking 30 days before and clean out, and I never failed a drug test in 15 years. So, but right after the test, we'd kind of disappear into the field and enjoy ourselves. But I was taking painkillers for my whole career. I had 18 surgeries when I played, so I was always in a rehab facility working out, and the pain was just unbearable at times. But eating those painkillers, I was always in a fog. I'd forget a lot of things. You couldn't go to the bathroom regularly. That's a big point. I mean, that's for those of you who don't do that regularly. It's not fun. And once I retired 20 years ago, it's been all cannabis. I do a lot of CBDs. I enjoy the high THC content indicas. They seem to work the best for my pain, and I'm going to continue to use it. And the more I learn about the plant, being around Dr. Uma, it's incredible. I've always loved it, but now that I know what it's actually doing for me, I love it even more.
Thank you for that. Tom, can you talk a little bit about the UK landscape, and I guess similar to football players as captain of the English Rugby Sevens team, can you talk a little bit about if there's similar applications and how you see this playing out in that market?
Sure, of course. There's obviously a lot of similarities between the NFL and rugby. The injuries are right up there. When I was playing, I finished playing 2 years ago after my second fractured skull. It was my 6th concussion, and I decided enough was enough. Came off the pitch and didn't recognise members of my family, and thought, okay, it's probably time to take the next step in my career. So I've since ventured on and working in the financial space and venture space. But looking back at my career now, I do wish there was someone who was informing us of what else was available. I'd wake up in the morning and have it on my bedroom side, prescribed by my doctor or my, primarily by my doctor, I should say, a cocktail of drugs, ranging from anti-inflammatories to prescription pain relief, to sleeping tablets at night. And you spoke about insomnia earlier. Yeah. And I found that after a week or two of taking those, you became reliant on them. So you couldn't take the field to train without having your pain relief. You couldn't go to bed at night. You'd sit there awake until you had your, it was Zopiclone for me, which got me to sleep. But you always had this chemical taste in your mouth, it felt. And it would take me 45 minutes to an hour to ingest the pills every single morning. I think the UK outlook is rather ignorant at the moment. I don't think it's a topic that's on people's agenda. I think it's something that they need to be aware of. The UK Anti-Doping Association should be aware of this. They should be talking about it along with WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association. There's a lot of stigma attached to drugs in sport at the moment, and that's primarily driven through ignorance and lack of transparency. But I believe if you can legitimize the use of cannabis through sport, you ensure a transparent, clean plane for everybody involved. I'd like to see that in the UK, but I fear it's a long way behind the likes of Canada, Australia, and Germany.
Here is what is happening. This came out, as you probably saw. You can see this ganja, a gift to us. This was a lecturer on the University of Technology who was busted here, and this was his statement. Ganja is good for us. A gift to us, rather. Now, ironically, it has us, US. And some people thought ganja a gift to the US. USA. And ironically, in a way, it is because some of our most celebrated Jamaicans, Junior Gang Marley, Ziggy Marley, and the whole Marley clan, planting thousands of acres of ganja in the United States of America as we speak. Can you believe that? Well, that's what's happening. Then now, a noted farmer said, the other day, ganja is the answer. He says that the only way to deal with this thing is get all the people who are so-called illegal growers to become legal. And then we have, talk about the controversy, we have sitting in somewhere in the room a gentleman by the name of Mark Santiago, medical ganja's slow journey irks foreign investors. So we want to cover all of these things. Basically, the entitlement or the topic of our seminar here is that we're going to focus on Jamaica's ganja industry, its history of medicinal, therapeutic, and scientific research and use. We were the first country in the world on this planet that we know of that produced medicine from the plant ganja.
Natural products are these compounds that are present in plants, and they are called secondary metabolites. The Jamaican plants has the highest level of one of the highest level of endemic plants, and when we decide to look at these natural products, it is important to design a broad spectrum of biological assays that you will use to detect the biological activities of these plants. Reason for this is that natural products, they tend to bind to a broad spectrum of biological receptors, and it's more important for endemics when you have no folk medicinal leads or any information about these plants. For example, in one assays that we did, we looked at 35 medicinal plants from Jamaica, and it was interesting to us that our breadfruit show one of the highest level of anti-cancer activity from the leaves of these plants. So there are tremendous scope for these plants. What we need to do is to sit down, design experiments, how we are going to validate their function, and in terms of that, we will find interesting biological molecules that can be put into pharmaceutical realm. I have been working on dibenzyl trisulfide, a compound isolated from the guinea hen weed plant, also called Petiver oleracea. It's also called anamu. This is one of the folk medicinal plants used by the Mayan people for hundreds of years. And what we found is that DTS, dibenzyl trisulfide, has one of the greatest potential of killing cancer cells. It also interesting for degenerative diseases. What we found is that dibenzyl trisulfide will reactivate the thymus. The thymus is an immune organ in your mediastinum in the chest that when it involutes or it's going to die off, you become prone to these degenerative diseases, diabetes, arthritis, hypertension. DTS seems to reprogram the thymus to do all these fancy immune response all over again. And it is one of the patents that we have coming out this month. And we hope that we will have clinical trials done soon. We are also interested in DTS as ganja compounds like CDB are known to have interesting anti-cancer activity. We want to combine DTS with these cannabis compounds and see if we can increase that anti-cancer potential that it shows. And this is where our research is at this point in time. We have some interesting projects at the University of Technology where we are looking at some anti-inflammatory properties of cannabis compound and other interesting stuff.
This is about an industry. In Jamaica, it's a little bit more complicated than if you're in Canada. I mean, you know, we're having discussions, timeless, with about 10 different countries right now, looking at building an international framework of working with different countries, and each country is different. Jamaica, we have some very unique situations here. There's 3 of them that I just want to point out. Number 1, our law allows for 2 ounces in terms of personal possession. That's interesting, because there's not a lot of countries that do have that. The second thing that we have is a special provision for the Rastafarian community, which allows them to use this for spiritual purposes. And that, again, is unique. So there's all of the elements in culture. In Jamaica, we also have a situation where, according to the U.S. government, there's 50,000 acres of ganja being grown in Jamaica right now. So as you try to bring and impose a legal framework on something that has been existing for 50 years, it's tremendously challenging. One of the potential approaches in the way that we've approached it, you definitely have to try and look at a separation. You cannot put recreational, whatever that means, the law in Jamaica uses the word therapeutic, along with medical. We have dedicated, we've committed ourselves to producing medicine. You know, Yuval Langestaff, who's the head of the Israel Cannabis Unit, who's, you know, one of the leaders in the world right now. In Israel, they've got 100 companies going through clinical trials. They're promising next year they're going to generate $1 billion US just from licensing arrangements on the products that they're developing. So they have a vision of where this is going to go. And he sent out an interesting quote this week. He said that while the US is mixing marijuana leaves in tea, Israel is busily creating medicine from marijuana. And I think that's a critical kind of understanding that we need to gather. Our opportunity is we started down this road before anyone else. Dr. Lockhart and Dr. West, they produced two drugs from cannabis. Had we as a country, had the politicians and others support them, these guys would be billionaires right now. So we have to start creating an innovative framework here in Jamaica where we look at all of the bodies. It's going to take the Scientific Research Council, it's going to take the Bureau of Standards, it's going to take UTEC, it's going to take UWI, it's going to take the Jamaica Association of Small Businesses, producers. Everyone has to come together. That's what they've done in Israel. They've centered it in an innovation center funded by the government. The government funds 85% of it. We may not be able to do that in Jamaica, but we can also look at creative means. But I think until we begin to define exactly what we want from this industry, if it's selling products to the tourists and that's what Jamaica wants, great. Let's figure it out and that's what we'll do. I believe that the future and the opportunity of Jamaica is to start the process again and reclaim our birthright, which we had, of creating real medicine. You know, we've got two products. You've got Dr. Williams guinea hen weed. We invested in Dr. Williams because he has a strategy. You heard him mention patent. I don't know if that sort of went over everyone's head as to the strategy. That was why we were attracted to Dr. Williams. He now has a patent. So he has intellectual property that he can license. You know, there is a process to go through in creating medicine. It means you got to go through clinical trials. As I said in Israel, I'm not going to give you a product that I'm not prepared to give my daughter. It has to be safe. And many of us, we have products that's out there. Ras Ivy talked about even just his own personal experience. We try all these things. We put these things in our body. We don't know what the repercussions are. It's medicine or it's recreational. If you want to get high, that's great. That's the recreational side. If you're putting a medicinal product out there and you're claiming it's medicine, then you need to have that product and ensure that it's safe before you provide it to any. Just basic law means that if you have an impact on someone, they're going to end up bringing an action against you. Your company is going to fail.